Breaking news, friends. Sabotage, gunfire in the Kremlin, conspirators caught, Moscow airports closed, Ukrainian ballistic missiles and Western rockets are heading for Moscow.
Whoa, calm down, son.
Petersburg, Moscow, the Kremlin, get ready. We'll discuss all this with top analyst Alexander Demchenko right now. There's constant chaos at Moscow airports because here's an infographic of Moscow airport closures over the past 6 days. It's just a total disaster. Vnukovo was closed 9 times, Sheremetyevo 4 times, and Domodedovo and Zhukovsky 20 times each. Indeed, Muscovites are in a panic. How do you assess TAURUS, the Kremlin, Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo?
I think that German missiles, and not just German ones, are flying toward Moscow and St. Petersburg, toward the major cities of the Russian Federation. I think the area near the Russian General Staff on Frunzenskaya, which is under the Arbat, will go up in flames. I think other important sites will go up in flames as well. The same goes for Krasnaya Pochta, which for some reason Putin and his entire entourage have been talking about lately. Why do we have to talk about this, Dasha? Because a real turning point has occurred. This is a turning point. This is a new phase of the war, a new stage. Everyone has perfectly understood that Putin is not just crazy, as Donald Trump said, but that Putin has no intention of backing down and only plans to escalate the situation, escalating it every single day. That's why I assume that the Germans, the French, the British, and the Americans have already lost their patience as well. Ukraine was given permission to strike Russia with anything possible. And initially, when this permission was granted, it was assumed that the strikes would be specifically on Moscow's territory. Apparently, Europe has decided to destroy and sabotage everything that can possibly be sabotaged in Russia, especially in the capital, because they believe that if the strikes are massive, if they rain down on Moscow, it will somehow change the course of the war, affect Muscovites, make the capital groan, and perhaps prompt the Russian elite to wake up a bit, and maybe take a closer look at what Vladimir Putin is actually doing and whether this war is really necessary or not. Let's not rule out a strike on Rubliovka either, because if something is launched toward Moscow, whether it reaches its target or not, Rubliovka is there, along with other elite cottages and settlements. So anything is possible. There could even be a strike on Rubliovka in the near future. We can't rule that out either. But what's important to note here is something else. It's clear that if there are massive missile strikes, and we know that Russians like to shoot down drones and missiles even over kindergartens. Just look, recently a passenger plane was almost shot down by mistake. A passenger plane was flying by, they fired at it, almost shot it down. Fortunately, everyone survived and nothing happened. Well, for them, that's considered fortunate, obviously. Just recently, someone shot at Putin. See, on one hand, they fire at passenger planes, and now they're shooting at Putin. And who passed on the logistics of Vladimir Putin's route? Then we have to say ourselves that there are conspirators in the Kremlin, that there is a group among Putin's security from the FSO, among the Chekists at Lubyanka, his security service, yes, and among the elite close to Putin, who want him dead, who secretly passed the coordinates to Ukraine. Moreover, there is another very important point that we know, as reported just recently by the British publication The Economist, that Ukraine and its allies have embedded algorithms into drones, just as Russia is now programming its own drones. So as I understand it, there are engineers at Russian defense enterprises who are against the war, who take and send embedding algorithms, codes, Enigma, modern stuff, into the drones. They send out how Putin makes drones. So essentially, there is a massive act of sabotage happening inside Russia. Then I just look at the news. I just watch the news. A railway has been destroyed in the Belgorod region, a huge stretch of track. In the Tula region, a railway line has been destroyed today, right at this very moment, because this is the connection to the Kursk region, specifically the Tula-Kursk route. This is, of course, directly linked to the border area, meaning it is an effort to minimize and neutralize further advances in the Kharkiv direction, and accordingly in the Sumy direction. Essentially, what we're talking about is that a series of large-scale, massive sabotage operations is now beginning on the territory of the Russian Federation, moving from the border areas toward Moscow, in order to completely neutralize any of Putin's capabilities and destroy any remaining margin of safety. And I am confident that the partisan movement, which was created both before the war and over the past 3.5 years of this major war, is operating and doing so very cohesively. Because if there are massive explosions on the railways and tracks in the Russian Federation, the offensive and military operations will simply stall. This has already happened in history. You understand? In African countries, a massive railway attack, explosions on the railways. And this has always had a very significant impact on the course of military operations and on the progress of offensives. A very strong impact. That's why German missiles, and not just German ones, we know that everyone has given permission. The French, the British, and even Trump, who has already turned a blind eye to it as well. They will fly. They will fly over Russia, including over Moscow and St. Petersburg. This will significantly change the war. It will change the attitude of the capital towards this war. I think Muscovites are not like people from Rostov, not like Uyghurs, you see, not like Udmurts, not like Bashkirs, sorry, not like all the other guys. These are people who will definitely start to tremble, who will definitely, they'll look and think, what is this Putin doing? And I think the Kremlin and Russian elite will be shaking even more. They're already shaking because, you see, Shoigu says he's cold and lonely. Patrushev has been silent lately. Medvedev practically never puts down his glass together with Gerasimov, probably drinking together with Mashka Sagarova, the three of them. So this will have an impact. Massive sabotage operations in the near future will affect the course of the war. As I've been saying for many weeks now, we're entering a new phase in this war. When Trump's peace initiative called Minsk III, the freezing of the war, was nullified, today Russia is convening a Security Council meeting to discuss how the West is disrupting peace negotiations. Russia is such a peace-loving agent, you see? Russia is trying to achieve peace, but the West keeps sabotaging everything. But in reality, we understand perfectly well that Putin has no intention of making peace. He isn't going to present any real plan for resolving this war, the hostilities, or anything else. This will be a breakdown, and a new stage of the war will begin, where everyone already understands and realizes that there will be no end for years to come, that this is going to last a long time, and it will be necessary to significantly raise the stakes in order to pacify the Kremlin's dictate.
Dear audience, please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, Dasha Schastliva, and write in the comments what you think about the fact that Vnukovo, Sheremetyevo, and other Moscow airports have been closed 20 times in the last 6 days, about our unprecedented drone attacks on Moscow, St. Petersburg, and other regions, and also about how good it will be for Muscovites and Petersburgers when the TAURUS missiles fly towards the two capitals of the Russian Federation, so to speak. Sasha, regarding what Mert said, that this will last for a long time, and also about Trump's mood. Well, Trump came out with, in my opinion, a very mild comment towards Putin, calling him crazy. He said he was crazy, yes, but nothing followed after that. Then I read in the Wall Street Journal your post, and the New York Times writes that Trump might impose sanctions this week, or he might not impose them. Let's talk about this.
He might impose them, but not the ones people were expecting. Look, yes, it's actually all very simple here. If the Americans suddenly find some courage and impose 500% tariffs on Russian oil, petroleum products, gas, and uranium, the Russian economy will essentially be in a state of embargo, completely shut off. Then we could say that Russia would have only a month or two left to fight, meaning this war would end quickly. The war could end as soon as tomorrow if Putin is faced with this. But they are not doing this. Lindsey Graham can come to Istanbul, he can leave Istanbul, he can shout, he can do whatever he wants. Trump is not doing this either. All right, maybe he'll introduce a 17,000 strong sanctions package or some other package. It doesn't matter at all. It makes no difference whatsoever. This won't stop Vladimir Putin. There are many ways to restrain Vladimir Putin. Both Europe and America have these means at their disposal. There is a real sanctions mechanism with these tariffs, with a complete oil embargo, and with measures to lower oil prices directly. Of course, this also includes blocking certain straits. This means talking to Turkey to ensure that no components or goods are supplied to the Russian Federation, neither through Central Asian countries nor through Turkey itself. It will be more complicated with China, of course, but there are other countries where dual-use and non-dual-use goods are shipped. There are plenty of opportunities to really hit Russia, but they aren't doing it, even though they're preparing for war themselves. I mean the Europeans. The Poles are preparing for war very seriously, and so on. Right now, many people are concerned about what will happen in Belarus. You see, okay, Trump is one thing. With Trump, everything is clear. Trump spends more time talking about how, during a golf outing, a goose bit his special envoy Litkov in the groin, and then he posted that photo. Rather than discussing what's really going on with Putin and why he can't manage to make a deal with Putin, that's what he doesn't talk about. Putin has lost his mind. All right, he's lost his mind. So what next? Everyone understands this. Everyone has known it for a long time. Everyone knows it's impossible to make a deal with him. So what now? But no steps have been taken. So what were we told next? We were told that if nothing works out this week and Trump imposes sanctions, and they don't work because, once again, they'll be toothless, then Trump will walk away from the negotiations. Well, that's exactly what the two of them want. Trump wants to get as far away from this as possible because he doesn't want to be seen as a loser or a failure. He doesn't want to end up with, so to speak, a second Afghanistan for himself, like how Biden fled from Afghanistan. He doesn't want that kind of situation for himself on a global scale. And this would be an even worse situation for America. And Putin wants Trump to walk away so that America doesn't help at all, neither Ukraine nor Europe, so that the situation becomes even more complicated because Putin believes that then he'll definitely be able to tighten the screws on everything. He'll definitely push through and pressure everyone. I'm very concerned about what's happening now in the north and what will happen. I mean, the Zapad 2025 military exercises on the territory of Belarus. You know, they had a phone call, Putin and Lukashenko, literally yesterday. He thanked him for the exchange of 1,000 for 1,000, which Lukashenko organized on the border with Ukraine. It's all nonsense. The real issue is to pressure Lukashenko and probably send as many of their military groups as possible into Belarus. And then it's up to fate. They could attack Kiev or Chernihiv from the north as well. No one is ruling out such a threat. I think that after February 2022, you'd have to be completely blind or deaf not to understand that this threat could really exist, that Putin could go for it again. Last time he failed with his blitzkrieg. Why do we think that this time he wouldn't want to try another blitzkrieg, correcting some mistakes, working things out? But on the other hand, of course, no one is ruling out further provocations from Belarusian territory against Lithuania or other Baltic countries or Poland. The Poles are preparing very seriously, and so are the Lithuanians. And in fact, we have to acknowledge one thing together. Europe has finally switched to a wartime footing. Europe is now in a state of war, and sooner or later a big war will break out. And we will still see European fighter jets bombing Moscow and other major cities of the Russian Federation because this confrontation is inevitable. Putin cannot take a step back. If he does, his own people will simply remove him. He cannot do it. And the Europeans cannot surrender because they understand what a colossal threat it would be for them if Putin occupies all of Ukraine. And he wants to occupy Ukraine. Trump has said this, Medvedev has said this, and even Putin himself has practically said it.
Sasha, can Graham go along with Blumenthal? In other words, can the Senate de facto go against the administration's policy, override Trump's veto, and by majority vote pass a bill that would become a law imposing hellish sanctions on the Russian Federation?
They can, but they really want to get something from the White House. They really want to get some contracts. They really want to get some preferences for their firms and companies. They really want to make money off something too, and so on. If I remember correctly, Graham has been introducing hellish sanctions against Russia for many, many years now, about 7 years. Where are these hellish sanctions? This is not the first bill authored by Graham threatening Russia with hellish sanctions. There are no hellish sanctions. Not from Graham, not from anyone else. They come up with one package after another. You know, I've come to a thought, a very important one, I think. What if these guys, at the beginning of 2023, had given Ukraine everything, imposed hellish sanctions against Putin, allowed them to strike with long-range missiles even back then, even ATAC-MS helped Ukraine with drone production? Russia would have already lost by now and would be down for the count. And we would be talking about what's happening in Russia, how it's being restructured, how it's falling apart, how the elite are fighting among themselves, how the empire is collapsing. But that didn't happen. Not after Prigozhin's mutiny, nor amid the chaos and confusion among the elites following the failure of the blitzkrieg. Not even after the tightening of sanctions, the first blows of sanctions against Putin, nothing happened. It wasn't Ukraine that missed the moment. Obviously, Ukraine couldn't have produced that many missiles, shells, ammunition, and so on. It's simply the West, by and large, that was cowardly and continues to be cowardly. Everything that's happening now, all this bloodshed, all the blame, aside from Putin, because Putin is certainly guilty. Putin is a murderer in this sense. Yes, he kills people. Russians are killing people. They occupy territory, they destroy homes, they rape, they loot, they abduct children. But those comrades who didn't help all this time, who blocked aid and support, that's also the doing of Trump and his team back then in the US Congress, who were constantly late in providing Ukraine with ammunition. They were indecisive. The Scholz government, remember, to give TAURUS or not to give, to give TAURUS or not to give, and what about tanks? Should we give Leopard tanks or not, and so on and so on and so on. So while they were hesitating, Putin increased both the number of drones and missiles, made deals with the Iranians, got North Korean shells and artillery, and even sent those North Koreans, those dogs, to fight against Ukraine. That's why we have the situation we see today. And this turning point in the war should have started much, much earlier. Let's put it that way, much earlier. It's only happening now, but only now is Europe starting to catch up. And I have a big question. Will it actually catch up?
The fact that Scholz came out and said that this war will last a very, very long time means that Europe has officially admitted its own powerlessness against Russia. Because if Europe were to impose the sanctions that actually need to be imposed right now, like disconnecting everything from SWIFT, embargoes on oil, gas, uranium, gold, and other things. Remember what Chichvarkin said, that if Europe introduces a certain package, then again, at that point, Russia would simply collapse. Its economy would collapse. But Europe didn't do that. So in other words, Merz is officially admitting almost cheerfully that there's nothing we can do. So Russia will keep fighting Ukraine, attacking Ukraine for many, many more years.
I don't know. Maybe Merz can do something, maybe not. He's not as impotent as, for example, Scholz. You see what I mean? Yeah, there's really no need to overthink this. In fact, it's enough to just do two things. You could do a lot more, but you need to do these two things. Shut down the Danish Straits so that no Russian ships, neither shadow nor regular, can pass through in any direction, selling this semi-legal oil. That's the first thing. That would practically bring everything in Russia to a halt. Simple as that. Everything would just come to a standstill. And second, a blockade of Kaliningrad. An economic blockade of Kaliningrad and a military blockade of Kaliningrad. What would Putin do then? Would he go to war against NATO? Would he attack the Finns? Would he move against Poland? What would he do? Right now, when all his forces are concentrated on Ukraine, if these things were to happen, he would surrender. Because the loss of Kaliningrad, which had been handed over to his first and only wife, who now goes by the surname Okretina, but was then Putin Lyudmila, she currently oversees the Kaliningrad region. That would be a major blow to him. A huge one. Kaliningrad is not Rostov. It's an important center for Russia, a separate concentration of troops, a military grouping, and so on. It would be a colossal defeat if the Baltic fleet were forced to head towards St. Petersburg. It would be a colossal defeat if the entire region were blockaded and all routes for delivering goods, any goods, humanitarian or otherwise, were completely cut off. That's it. And the Danish Strait would be closed. That would be enough to make him back down, drop all his ultimatums, and sign a peace agreement. Yes, that peace agreement would have lasted for 3 or 4 years. But that's a pause that absolutely everyone would have needed in this situation. Ukraine and the West included. Not just Russia. But that's not what's happening.
Residents of the Suwalki corridor are leaving in fear of a Russian invasion, writes Bild. Amid rising tensions, residents of the strategically important Suwalki corridor have begun to leave the region en masse. This was reported by the German newspaper Bild. It is noted that this narrow strip of land, 65 kilometers between Poland and Lithuania, which separates Belarus and Kaliningrad, is a vulnerable point in NATO's defense. And the military believe that in the event of a conflict, the armed forces of the Federation could strike from both sides. Russian artillery capable of firing over 30 kilometers covers the entire Suwalki corridor. What do you think?
I would ask, where's the army? Where is their unified army that they keep talking about? All right, there is no unified army. They don't even want to send peacekeeping forces and contingents to Ukrainian Lviv. They're afraid, they're cowards, to Odessa and so on. Fine. But where is the army? The British, French, German armies? Where are the Swedish systems, fighter jets, artillery? Where is the Finnish artillery there? Where is the defense? Just to completely neutralize any threat from Russia and Belarus. So there are a huge number of questions. They just, well, fine, let's evacuate people, but what then? Obviously, this is the road to Kaliningrad, a land corridor to Kaliningrad. but it's a narrow strip that could separate the Baltic countries from Poland, obviously cut them off. But this strip is extremely vulnerable, even in the event of an advance by Russian troops. And it's not for nothing that Sweden was made a NATO member and so on. Gotland Island and so on and so forth. None of this happened by accident. But that's still not enough now. You see, we can just express our outrage, we can discuss it. These are obvious things.
Of course.
The question is that now a new stage of the war is beginning, a new phase of the war. So what comes next? For Ukraine, it's clear what's next. This is going to be a long war. Putin doesn't want to make peace. As long as he doesn't face problems with the economy, first with human resources, second and directly in military terms, third, he will keep going. His economy will most likely collapse by the end of this year. Everyone is already saying there will be a recession, there will be a downturn, they'll have to do something, and this will affect the defense industry. We'll see what happens with oil prices. Most likely, they will also collapse in the relatively near future. All of this, one way or another, will affect the course of military operations, the fighting. But this time needs to be used somehow. Look, I actually view all these things optimistically. Why? Because considering that the Germans have classified not only the transfer of missiles to Ukraine, but also all other equipment, ammunition, and weapons, and given that they have granted permission to strike anywhere possible, this indicates that they have internally decided that war with Russia is inevitable and that they need to fight. They don't want to fight themselves, they don't want their soldiers to go and fight Russia. And they have decided that it is necessary to fully equip the Ukrainian soldier with everything needed to destroy or neutralize Russia. Or rather, to neutralize it. I think they are betting on neutralizing Vladimir Putin and his regime. There is only one question. How much time will it take?
A very interesting piece of news. Today, even on Nastoyaщее Vremya, you showed it too. It made its way onto a Telegram channel. The people will tear you apart with their bare hands. Even the wives themselves will come and tear you apart. That's a quote. A volunteer showed how Russian soldiers on crutches are, of course, being held in the basement of the 5th MSP to be sent on a deadly assault. So, the widow of a fallen soldier and a volunteer from the Russian World Movement. Rashist Anna Uvarova published a video with soldiers which features servicemen from the 5th Separate Motorized Rifle Brigade. And she says that they are going to be eliminated, disposed of, just sitting and waiting for when they will be taken away. No one will be returned as Cargo 200. No one but Putin can stop this. There is a lot of swearing in there. And she said that they are sending the Rushists to be slaughtered. And if anything happens, the people will tear you apart with their bare hands. Even the wives themselves will come and tear you apart. And in general, it should be the officials dying, not ordinary Russian soldiers. You are taking away our husbands, fathers, and children. You are the cattle who should be going ahead of all the guys. But you are hiding out. End of quote. Do you think the people won't rise up? The people will tear you apart with their bare hands. Even the wives themselves will come and tear you apart. Now, another quote. Is this just a small, faint warning that shouldn't be paid any attention at all? Or is this the beginning of a powerful confrontation in Russia against the Kremlin?
It's not a warning, it's nothing. Look, Dasha, there once was a truly important movement during the First Chechen War, when the mothers of conscripts, the mothers of those mobilized, came and demanded that Yeltsin put an end to it. And Yeltsin ended it. Because it was a very powerful movement, a united movement, and back then Russia was completely different. It was in a semi-collapsed, poor, dire state. Something had to be done. And of course, a war like that, a war fought over money, a war that was started by Korzakov and the security services, it had to be ended, and it was ended because this part of the population, the mothers, rose up, came forward and said, that's it. Remember when there was a similar situation with conscripts? Conscripts were sent to war against Ukraine, and the conscripts' mothers started speaking out, and Putin immediately gave the order to rescue the conscripts and somehow smooth over the situation. They are afraid of this movement. They remember what happened during the First Chechen War, and they don't want anything like that to happen again. But when we talk, for example, about an initiative like the Wives of the Mobilized, they banged their pots in the kitchens, and that was the end of it. They went out to the Ministry of Defense a few times. The generals who came out told them to shut up. Even colonels came out to them, and they fell silent. Nothing will come of it in this sense. Why won't anything come of it? Because on one side, you have these dissatisfied wives of the mobilized whose husbands are being killed. And on the other side, you have the same kind of wives, not of the mobilized, but of those who were bought off. She marries once, her husband is killed, she becomes a widow, gets the money, marries a second time, gets the money, a third time, gets the money. It's a whole business. It's a whole business. They all get bought off. Do you understand what the point is? It's not just some mobilized person who was grabbed, tied up, and sent off and then went to destroy. For the most part, these are people who wanted to get money for going to another territory, to a foreign country, and killing someone. They're willing to kill someone for money. They're mercenaries just like Prigozhin, who was killed in the sky over Russia. Exactly the same kind of mercenaries, no different from this cat. The only difference is that cat was getting billions. They get a few million rubles, which are wiped out by inflation in Russia. They're killers just the same. That's why I don't believe in this whole movement of the mobilized soldiers' wives, that they'll come and do something like that. Only Putin's own elite will remove him. Right now, there are probably no conspirators in the Kremlin. They might appear when something collapses, when things start to fall apart. It will be a domino effect. When, as I repeat, there is a blow to the economy, a blow to oil, a blow at the front, and so on, it will all collapse and Putin will be removed. But he understands perfectly well that he has no other way out of this situation except to keep waging war. Because as long as he continues the war, Dasha, he can keep resetting everything and everyone. You've already heard once again from Tolstoy in the State Duma that they're planning to reset the constitution again, to rewrite the constitution, which he had already reset back in 2020. They're planning to reset it again, to tighten things even further. And what will follow the resetting of the constitution? Repressions, mass purges. Take Shoigu, for example. I'm 100% sure he's afraid to go out on the streets of Moscow. He has 14 bodyguards, who accompany him everywhere. Yes, I wanted to discuss this with you. Why wasn't he at the parade, and why did he suddenly increase his security detail to the number you mentioned last September, October? What is the reason for this? And a publication wrote that he's afraid of internal enemies. Sasha, he's afraid of Putin. He's afraid of Putin. He stole money right under Putin's nose. He didn't share that money. Why did the confrontation arise between Prigozhin, Shoigu, and Gerasimov on the other side? Because of money. I was told the amount was $6 billion. $6 billion. That was the amount. They couldn't split it. A confrontation began, which escalated to the point where Putin had to urgently leave to flee Moscow. He grabbed his mayonnaise, got on a plane, and flew out because his life was in danger. Or at least that's what they thought there. Or maybe they made up that danger for him. Because Prigozhin didn't want to kill Putin. It all just fell on him. He wanted to deal with Shoigu and Gerasimov. Putin had to have Prigozhin killed by Patrushev's hands. The Wall Street Journal wrote about this. It's not my invention that it was Patrushev who killed Prigozhin. Patrushev was sidelined, sent off to deal with ships after that. Shoigu's people were eliminated. 8 out of 10 of Shoigu's deputies are under arrest in prison. One of Shoigu's deputies, the 9th, who was responsible for the money, is missing. Now they want to neutralize and get rid of Gerasimov too, because he's also a party to the conflict. And Shoigu walks around having acquired 14 bodyguards. With 14 bodyguards, he walks around in fear. And it's not just that he says he's cold and lonely. Shoigu knows perfectly well that tomorrow he might not wake up. He knows perfectly well that Putin could kill him. There are a huge number of people who want to finally tear apart Shoigu's empire. They've practically torn it apart already. Because Shoigu is not just the Ministry of Defense and contracts like those of Timur Ivanov. Shoigu is also the Ministry of Emergency Situations, which he protected. A huge, enormous agency. You understand? Shoigu, yes, that's the Ministry of Defense. Shoigu, yes, that's the contracts. Shoigu, yes, that's all sorts of corrupt schemes. Shoigu is the construction of Patriot Park for 20 billion rubles, which they embezzled. 20 billion rubles that they stole. Shoigu is the procurement and sale of weapons. Shoigu is making money at the front. It's sending drugs to the front, prostitutes to the front, black market weapons that were being funneled to terrorists, to the Taliban, and so on. Shoigu was involved in this at the early stage and made money off it. Together with Gerasimov and his generals, And he didn't just get those bodyguards for nothing. He understands perfectly well that Putin will take revenge on him for Prigozhin. Putin most likely had to kill Prigozhin. He gave that order. But I think that now he really regrets that he was forced to eliminate a person whom he believed was working very effectively. And he will seek revenge. And Shoigu knows this perfectly well.
So this summer could be decisive for many players connected to Prigozhin and essentially the Russian army.
I think so, yes. Now, Kadyrov started talking. This came out in some video, whether it was boring or not. He was also part of this game, but he didn't make it there that time.
I wanted to ask you about Kadyrov. He recently appeared and started talking about life and death, some kind of philosophical statements. Sasha, I listened to them. For what purpose? Why? Why?
I think that Kadyrov is simply sending a signal here. Literally, just a few weeks ago, or perhaps about a month ago, there were persistent rumors circulating that Kadyrov was not doing well at all. I think that they wanted to remove him from his position. He has a huge number of enemies, a very significant amount. Yes, he is currently being helped and supported by Zolotov, who is the head of the National Guard, and who was formerly the personal bodyguard of Sobchak and, in a sense, also serves as an aide to Putin, but the FSB is against Kadyrov. Military intelligence is against Kadyrov. The GRU is against Kadyrov. The Ministry of Defense, the General Staff, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Investigative Committee represented by Bastrikin, and the Prosecutor's Office are all against Kadyrov. These are all people who oppose Kadyrov. These are clans that oppose Kadyrov. And now they're simply being signaled. So guys, look. I went to Putin and once again received the mandate to rule. And there's nothing you can do to me. I think that's more or less how this signal should be interpreted, as performed by Ramzan Kadyrov. But all those people who, in one way or another, took part in this conflict with Prigozhin and in this resolution that concerned Prigozhin have either been neutralized, eliminated, or are under constant pressure of some kind. So yes, the infighting and purges will continue, and Putin's vendetta has not stopped. It will go on, and he will see it through. He will gradually destroy all of these people.
Sasha, our audience is asking you, since we do these streams with you every week, I've noticed they're writing in and asking you to give a brief forecast of what might happen this week before our next meeting. What do you think? A short forecast, a mini prediction from top analyst Alexander Demchenko?
I think that Trump will not take any significant actions regarding Russia, and he himself will try to get out of the war in the near future. The Europeans obviously will begin urgently supplying Ukraine with missiles and other long-range munitions in order to strengthen its position ahead of the summer offensive. I think that a series of sabotage operations will begin in the near future. We will see them in large numbers over the next week or week and a half at railway junctions, tracks, and so on. And it is to be expected, though not in the coming week but in the longer term, that the drone war will intensify even further, both in relation to Russia and to Ukraine.
Friends, please like this video. Every week I meet with top analyst Alexander Demchenko. This is the Sasha plus Dasha segment. We discuss the key events, and we hope that if a major event suddenly happens, we will do a special broadcast. But mainly it's once a week. Friends, subscribe to my channel, Dasha Happy. Write in the comments what you think about the situation overall, your forecasts, your opinions, your analysis. Alexander Demchenko, top analyst. Sasha, thank you very much and see you soon.
Thank you. See you next time. Bye.